Welcome back after residential, speaking again about aesthetics. I have been reading the old masters of aesthetics and realize how hard it is to try to understand what they were speaking about. But important, I think, because they're considered to be those who set the standards, be that true or not. That many of our early ideas about aesthetics were very much framed by a Eurocentric viewpoint. It's interesting to consider those views as they relate to the views of folks from Eastern traditions and from Africa. Thinking a little bit about Aristotle, who said that he agreed with Plato about mimesis, imitation. I think about the paper on the art of the Japanese garden and how imitation does seem to be a very important aspect of learning that aesthetic. I also think about Aristotle's idea that art has, or anything has the potential to act on something else, to affect something else. So in that sense, the art of the garden does have the potential to affect, I would say, a human being, perhaps in terms of that person being in a more meditative state or moving toward a more meditative state or to more balance. I also think of his idea that art is made by reasoning, and that also seems to resonate with the paper on the secret teachings of the Japanese gardens, that it's a period of thought and a practice, an apprenticeship that has to do with reasoning that helps the novice move toward mastery of that understanding of aesthetics. Also thinking of O'Donohue, whose lecture you heard, his perspective then seems to be a bit different. He speaks about how important landscape is not only aesthetically, but because of his Celtic beliefs, that what's visible leads to what is invisible, to what's experienced spiritually and within. And that nature is very much related to a sense of the body as it relates to inner life specifically. He speaks about the importance of visual aesthetics from his perspective and the idea that the aliveness of the landscape is a component of that aesthetic. It was also interesting to hear him speak about how one of the possible benefits or important points of aesthetics from the Celtic perspective is that one may be drawn into the rhythms of the life of the universe, and that also may be healing. So, for example, he speaks of persons living under extreme stress and traumatic situations, and how experiencing beauty may be something that functions to sustain that person through turmoil. Thinking a bit more about the art of the Japanese garden paper, the author speaks about steps in learning the aesthetic as viewing the works of past masters, learning from nature, apprenticeship, oral transmission, and the secret texts. And so then some of these steps are not so different from how more Western views of learning an aesthetic may be considered to occur. So experiencing nature for the gardener is compared to learning about the human body or experiencing artistic works that have been made in the past as one learns about aesthetics and the creation of what is considered to be artistic. It's interesting that an aspect of the Japanese perspective is that this aesthetic is learned by being able to directly experience what's existed for centuries as the gardens were planted and maintained and evolved with time. It's also interesting, the idea that to learn the aesthetic, it's experienced by being present and being open to what comes in through the senses. The idea that learning the aesthetic is related to kinesthetics, that what's experienced affects the body and is taken in through the nervous center to be part of the person who then is one who practices that aesthetic. And that idea made me think of Woodman's work, of her idea about how important it is that aspects of what may be the unconscious or not consciously perceived are stored in the body. It's interesting to think about the learning of the Japanese aesthetic as an apprenticeship, or really as working to pass through steps of a rite of passage, from being an apprentice who begins by only observing, to participating, to then moving toward becoming a master. And it's also interesting to think about the idea of oral transmission, which refers, according to the paper, to a body of secret knowledge and techniques passed from master to disciple, again suggesting a rite of passage and apprenticeship. And the process of learning the aesthetic is also described as being one of personal growth, so that this process of becoming part of the aesthetic is actually an aspect of individuation for the novice who hopes to become a master gardener. Oral transmission is considered to be of higher or lower order. Higher order transmissions consist of insight that comes close to establishing a universal design principle. And so one must come to the experience with some understanding of aesthetics to then have their appreciation enhanced or lifted up to a higher level. And then that transmission may also be what's called lower order, that has to do with more cultural aspects. So I think that something that's very important as we think about aesthetics, as discussed in this week's lecture, is that in each situation, the author's ideas are very much culture-bound, from the ideas about aesthetics of Aristotle and others being related to their culture and history, to the aesthetic of the Japanese garden being very related to the natural physical landscape and to the spirituality of people in that region, and of O'Donoghue's talk and how aesthetics are very much related to Celtic metaphysics and ideas about the world and aspects of the world that are unseen. Maybe an interesting thought to leave with is O'Donoghue's statement that each of us is an artist, because each of us is capable of imagination, and that dreams are the example, dreams and the imaginative acts of children that connect all humans and make all human beings artists. Thank you.